In this video, I'm going to show you that how the send HTTP request has been processed within the socket communication mechanism. So it will allow us to send the request to the HTTP server, and then after processing the request, it will be get back to the client and will be telling us that whether the authentication or the connection has been made or not. So I have just written this method send HTTP request, and then I provided actually a URL, and this URL would going to be actually representing the address of our web server. And this is actually a result, the result which we're going to be actually using for reading the input line of the stream, which is actually coming inside. So for example, if a stream of connection like hello world is coming and we are actually reading it, so for that purpose we're going to use the result, and we're going to state and store that input stream inside the result. The next we have is actually a URL. So we have actually instantiated the URL in here, and then we provided the authentication server address as a parameter to this URL instantiation class. And what is user authentication server address? It is actually the address which we have previously declared in here, that is 127.0.01/Untitled Chapter. So I'm going to get back to the send HTTP request method. And in here I've just created the HTTP URL connection. So what is HTTP URL connection? HTTP URL connection is actually used to make a single request, but the underlying network connection to the HTTP server may be shared by multiple instances. So for that purposes we use HTTP URL connection. And then we actually instantiate the HTTP URL connection by opening the connection. So what does it really mean? By open connection we means that we are actually opening all the gates for the communication and for sending the HTTP request to the server. And then we have is actually the setDoOutput method. SetDoOutput method provides us the capability of setting the doOutput field for the URL connection of the specified field. A URL connection can be used for input and output. So if you are intending to make or to set the URL connection for output, you're going to make it true. So that is why we actually set the doOutput method actually to true. So we are actually going to make the URL connection for output. The next one is we are using the print writer. So what does print writer do? It actually prints the formatted representation objects to a text output stream. So that is why we are actually using the same kind of technology for the connection through which we are actually getting the output stream. So now we are actually using the out.println, and we are actually printing the parameters which are going to be enclosed in, and then after that we are closing the print writer class. The next we are using in here is a buffer reader. Buffer reader is actually used for reading a kind of text file. So for example, the incoming connection is online or hello world or anything like that. So we're going to be using buffer reader to read that incoming connection and that process it according to the requirement. So here we are actually instantiating that input stream reader with buffer reader, and then we are getting the connection in the form of input stream. So now the next thing we are using is actually an input line. So input line is actually referring to the line on which the text are actually printed out. So if for example there are text which is covering 10 lines, so the input lines would be actually 10. So if the input, so what we are doing is actually we are reading the text string with the help of buffer reader and storing it inside the input line variable, that is actually a string variable, and we are stating that if it is not equal to null, then the while loop will be running until that, and then put the result, put everything in a result variable by concatenating the input line with the result. Concate means concatenation. So what does it really mean? For example, if we have a string of text and we are actually reading from that string of text, like for example hello world, so it starts with H and ends with D, so we are actually starting from H and then reading it and until the D appears. So until the D appears, the while loop will run, and the while loop will run until the D appears, and after the D finishes we will store and we will actually concatenate each and every line with the result and will store it inside a result variable, and then we will close the buffer, and then we will actually catch the malformed URL exception. This exception is thrown to indicate that a malformed URL has been thrown out or cached it. Input-output exception is used when we are dealing with reading and outputting something, like reading from the data or writing to that file. So we then use input-output exception. So if anything happens in that case, we're going to catch that out. And if the text length, which is actually stored in a result, is equal to 0, then what you're going to have to do is, then you're going to have to put everything inside a result variable, and that would be actually the HTTP request failed, which means that there is nothing to read on, there is no connection input stream, and we have nothing to read on, and that will be stored in a result with a request of failed, and then we're going to return the result.